So in the last class, we were discussing about the various types of irrigation, and also the three major types of irrigation is one is the diversion irrigation, the second one is storage cum diversion irrigation, and third one is combined irrigation. First one is the diversion irrigation, the second one is storage irrigation, and the third one is storage cum diversion irrigation. So now today we shall discuss what are the different methods of irrigation. So modes or methods of applying water to the crop. So the irrigation water may be applied to the crop by four basic methods. That is, first is surface irrigation method, and second one is sprinkler irrigation method, and third one is subsurface irrigation method, and the fourth one is drip irrigation method. So these two, that is the drip irrigation method and the sprinkler irrigation methods, are the latest one, which saves a considerable amount of water, and also the efficiency of irrigation is more in drip irrigation and sprinkler irrigation when compared to surface irrigation and subsurface irrigation methods. Now, so the irrigation method, so this is the flow chart. So irrigation methods are basically of four types. The first one is surface irrigation, the second one is subsurface irrigation, third one is sprinkler irrigation, and the fourth one is drip irrigation, or it's also called as drop by drop irrigation. Again, this surface irrigation method is subclassified into three types. That is flooding method, second one is furrow method, and third one is contour farming. Again, the flooding method is again divided into two types. One is the wild flooding, second one is the controlled flooding. Again, in controlled flooding, you have six types. That is free flooding, contour laterals, border strip method of irrigation, and check flooding, and the basin flooding and zigzag method. So this is the flow chart which explains about the irrigation methods, surface irrigation method, and subsurface irrigation method, wherein the water is directly supplied to the root zone of the crop. So the places where you have little or insufficient water, then you can go in for the subsurface irrigation method. So this method is not usually practiced in our country. So now, the objectives or reasons for adopting any irrigation method for applying water to the field are as follows. So all the irrigation methods has got certain advantages and disadvantages. So before selecting any method, you have to go through the objectives. What are the objectives of selecting a particular method of irrigation to grow the crops? So now, for light irrigation, uniform water distribution with as small as depth of application. That means the water should be supplied that is in sufficient depth for the efficient growth of a particular crop. So for light irrigation, uniform water distribution with a small depth of application, as small as about 1 centimeter should be possible, and at the same time it should afford heavy irrigation. Uniform water depth of application about 50 to 20 centimeters should be possible, and it should allow the use of large concentrated flow should be possible for reducing conveyance losses and the labor cost. And the fourth objective is it should be suitable for use with economic conveyance structures. So the conveyance structures are basically the main canals, branch canals, and the distributary canals in the water channels. And it should be such that the mechanical farming should be facilitated. So these are the objectives of any irrigation methods that we are going to select. Now, good irrigation method, it should result in increased the crop yield and conservation of soil productivity, and also economic utilization of water. And over irrigation results in soil erosion and waterlogging problems, and also the salt accumulation near the root zone of the crop, and also the nutrients, whatever the nutrients that is supplied to the crop, there are chances of leaching of these nutrients because of the over irrigation. And also the overall objective of an irrigation method is to see that the required amount of moisture is available in the root zone of the crop during the entire growth period of a particular crop. Now, these are the objectives of the irrigation methods. Now, surface irrigation method. In this method, the irrigation water is applied by spreading water as a sheet or a small stream on the land to be irrigated. Or it is defined as the group of application techniques where the water is applied and distributed to the soil by the gravity flow. Especially in case of surface irrigation method, water is supplied to the crop by gravity flow through network of canal system. Now this figure shows about the surface irrigation method. Now the whole area is divided into number of rows here, and these are the small earthen bunds. So in between these earthen bunds, you can supply the water, and here the plants are grown here. So this is figure shows about the surface irrigation method generally practiced in our country. So now first one is under surface irrigation method, we have the uncontrolled, or it is also called as the wild flooding. So in this method, water is applied by spreading water over the land to be irrigated without any preparation. Directly the water is applied to the land, and there is no restriction for the movement of water, and it follows the natural slope of the land because the water is supplied to the crop by means of gravity flow, and the water may be applied to the land directly from a natural stream during seasons of high flow, as in inundation irrigation. So inundation irrigation is nothing but the water is sufficiently supplied to the land such that the land becomes saturated with water and the excess water is drained out. This method is suitable for flat and smooth land, but involves wastage of water, and hence it can be practiced where water is abundant and inexpensive. So this is a very old method of irrigation. So that is uncontrolled, or it is also called as wild flooding. Now you can see this figure. Water is supplied to the entire land such that the soil becomes saturated, so the excess water may be drained out at the tail end of the plot. Now controlled flooding. So in this method, water is applied by spreading it over the land to be irrigated with proper control over the flow of water, and as well as the quantity of water to be applied in different growth stages of the crop. Here we have central control over the application of water to the crop. So in the earlier method, there is no control over the application of water. The water is directly allowed to the plot, and once the soil becomes saturated with water and the excess water is taken out. So wherever the water is inexpensive and you have abundant water, then you can go in for the uncontrolled flooding. So in case of controlled flooding, the water is applied by spreading it over the land to be irrigated with proper control over the flow of water, and as well as the quantity of water to be applied. In such methods, prior and land preparation is essential. So before application of the water, the land has to be prepared for the irrigation. So now you can see here, this is the control method of flooding. So water is supplied to the plot by control method. So you have the control over the application of water to the crops. Now free flooding. This method is also known as irrigation by plots. Here the field is divided into number of small size plots. You can see here the entire field is divided into number of small size plots. Hence, the field is divided into number of small size plots which are practically level, and water is admitted at the higher end of the plot, and the water supply is turned off or cut off as soon as the water reaches the lower end of the plot. So here you have certain control over the application of water, and the depth of water can also be controlled in the case of free flooding. So alignment and spacing of bunds depends on the type of soil and topography of the land, and steeper the slope, closer spacing of laterals and relatively more permeable soils. So wherever you have steeper slope and permeable soils, the spacing of these laterals, because the land is divided into small size plot, the spacing of which can be reduced where you have steep slope and the permeable soils. And flat, and in case of flat land, spacing of laterals may be increased and relatively less permeable soil. So now this figure shows here the entire plot is divided into number of equal strips, and these are the field channels. You can see these are the field channels, and water is allowed to flow through this field channel, and again water is supplied to the plot. So this method is known as free flooding, where you have certain control over the application of water to the crop. So from the branch canal or from the field channel, so the water is directly supplied to the field channel, and here the entire plot is divided into number of rectangular plots, and the water is supplied through this field channel. So this method of irrigation is known as free flooding, where you have the control over the application of water. Now, flooding by contour laterals. So the laterals are aligned approximately along the contour lines and applicable for steeper terrains. Wherever you have steeper terrains, so the laterals, whatever the contour laterals, are aligned approximately along the contour lines, and irrigation is possible only on one side of the lateral, and spacing depends upon the prominent grade of the field, uniformity of slope, and the type of soil. So wherever you have a steeper terrain, then you can have these contour laterals which follow the contour of that particular area. And here irrigation is possible only on one side of the contour lateral. Now you can see this figure. Here you have a sloping land, and these are the contour laterals which follow the contours of that particular area. So the spacing of which mainly depends on the slope of that particular area and also the permeability of the soil, So on a steeper terrain, so instead of practicing the free flooding method, so we can have this contour laterals. So the spacing of which mainly depends on the slope of that particular area and also the permeability of the soil. So this method you can see here, these are the contours. So the spacing of which mainly depends on the slope of that particular area. In between these contours, the crops can be grown satisfactorily. So these contour laterals are nothing but the earthen bunds. Earthen bunds are constructed in between the crop, and water is supplied from the higher end, and it follows the natural gradient of that plant. So here you can see here is a steeper slope where you have these contour laterals or bunds or contour laterals are provided. So next, third method of irrigation under free flooding is the border strip method. In this method, the land to be irrigated is divided into a series of long narrow strip separated from each other by means of the earthen bunds, or it is also called as levees or borders. So in this method, the entire land to be irrigated is divided into a series of long narrow strips separated from each other by these earthen bunds, and the width of the strip varies between 10 to 20 meters, and the length of the strip varies between about 60 to 300 meters. So depending upon the nature of the soil and the rate of water supply. And the strip of land has no cross slopes and has uniform gentle slope in the longitudinal direction. And this method is suitable to grow forage crops requiring least labor. So especially for rice and sugar cane, so you can adopt this border strip method, and the mechanized farming can be adopted in this method. Now you can see here, this is the border strip method. So here the entire land is divided into number of equal longitudinal strip, and the width of which may vary between 10 to 20 meters, and the length may vary between 50 to 300 meters. So the entire land is divided into equal number of longitudinal strips, and these are nothing but the earthen bunds or levees. So the each strip is separated by means of these earthen bunds or levees, and here you have a supply ditch, and water is admitted at a higher elevation. So water is admitted. So as the water flows, correct, and this plot, this rectangular plot has a gentle slope, and once the tail end of the plot gets sufficient depth of water, and the water is turned off or cut off at this point. Now you can see here, the entire land is divided into equal number of rectangular strips, and these strips are separated by means of these earthen bunds, or it's also known as the levees or borders, and water is admitted at the higher elevation, and once the lower tail end of the plot gets sufficient water, water is turned off at the higher point, at this point. So here the type of soil and the length of the border strip. So the length of the border strip may it may depend on the type of soil. Especially in case of sandy soil, the length is about 60 to 90 meters, because in case of sandy soil, it is highly permeable. Hence, the length of the border strip is in between 60 to 90 meter. And if it is a medium silt loam, the length may be between 90 to 150 meter. And especially in case of clay soil or clay loam, so the length may vary between 150 to 300 meters. And the fourth method in case of free flooding is checks or levees. In this method, a comparatively large stream of water discharged into a relative level plot surrounded by checks or levees, or it's also called as low rise bunds. So the checks are usually 30 centimeter high, and the checks may be temporarily for a single crop season or semi-permanent for repeated use, as in the case of paddy fields. So levees are generally constructed along the contours having vertical interval of about 5 to 10 centimeter, and the size of the plot depends upon the discharge of water and porosity of the soil. So in any case of irrigation engineering, the type of any irrigation method, the type of soil plays a very important role. So wherever you have a sandy soil, then it is highly permeable. So then you have to supply sufficient depth of water such that the percolation losses are less. So in check flooding, the check is filled with water at a fairly high rate and allowed to stand until the water infiltrates. Now you can see here, this figure shows the check flooding. So here this is the supply ditch, and here you have these levees or earthen bunds which separates the plots. So you can see here levees along the contours, so which follow the contour of that particular area. So these are the levees or contours. So the entire area is constructed by means of these levees or earthen bunds, and water is directly admitted between these contour laterals. So wherever you have a highly permeable soil, large quantity of water is supplied so that the percolation losses are less in case of the check flooding. So next is the basin flooding method. So this method of irrigation is adopted for irrigating orchard crops or fruit trees, so mangoes or other like orchard crops. So this method is adopted. So for each tree, a separate basin is created, which is circular, which is generally in a circular shape. However, in some cases, basins are made large to include 2 or more trees in each basin. So here, basically, a basin is created around the plant and water is supplied directly to the basin. And in some cases, the basins may be interconnected. With each other, and water is supplied through a separate field channel. But in some cases, the basins are interconnected. Now you can see here, especially here, a basin is created around the plant, and water is directly supplied to these basins. And sometimes these basins may be interconnected. So here you have the main field channel, and from this field channel, the water is directly supplied to the basin. So here you can see the basins are created around this plant, and this type of irrigation method is generally used to grow orchard crops. Now you can see this is the typical plan of the basin method of irrigation, and this shows the cross section of the basin method of irrigation. Here a basin is created and water is directly supplied to the basin through the field channel, and sometimes the basins may be interconnected. So once this basin gets filled, so the same water can be connected or it can be supplied to another basin. So this method of irrigation is generally used to grow the orchard crops. Now the last method under the free flooding method is zigzag flooding or zigzag irrigation method. So here this is a special method of flooding where the water takes a circuitous route before reaching the dead end of the plot. Now you can see here the water from the field channel is diverted through the small borders or strips, and it takes a circuitous route. It takes a curved route before it reaches the tail end of the plot. Now you can see here this is the zigzag method of irrigation where water takes a That means it takes a turn here before it reaches the tail end of the plot. So only disadvantage of this method is the mechanical operations like plowing and tilling becomes difficult. So this method is not generally used wherever you have less amount of water or insufficient amount of water, then you can go in for this zigzag method of irrigation. So the irrigation methods are basically of three types. One is the surface irrigation method. So under surface irrigation method, again, we have the free flooding method. So in this case of flooding method, water is directly supplied to the plot without any control. So again, under flooding, so we have the wild flooding method. So here, large quantity of water is directly supplied to the plot without any control. So sometimes we can also control the application of water. That is known as the control method of irrigation, or it's also known as control flooding. Again, under control flooding, we have 6 types. That is, one is the free flooding. The second one is contour laterals. The third one is the border strip method. And the fourth one is check flooding. And the fifth one is the basin method of irrigation. And the last one is zigzag method of irrigation. So that is under surface irrigation method. Now, these are the 6 types of irrigation under the surface irrigation method. Next is furrow method of irrigation. So in this method, water is applied to the land to be irrigated by a series of long, narrow field channels called as furrows. And a furrow is a narrow ditch that is about 75 to 125 millimeter deep and excavated between rows of plant to carry irrigation water. So the spacing of this furrow mainly depends upon the spacing of the plants. And the length of the furrow is usually about 200 meters. And in this method, only 1/5 to 1/2 of the surface is wetted. So the evaporation losses are very much reduced in case of furrow irrigation method. So the other methods of irrigation, since the water is directly supplied to the field, so the evaporation losses are more. So under this furrow irrigation method, the evaporation losses are less. So this figure clearly explains the furrow irrigation method. So now here the water is carried through this main supply ditch, and you have these subsidiary ditches, subsidiary water course or subsidiary ditches, and the entire plot is divided into number of rectangular strips, and these are the furrows. Here, these are the furrows, and here the depth of the furrows are within about 15 to 20 millimeter depth. So now in between these two furrows, you can grow the crop. And here the operation losses is very less because only about 1/5 or half of the land is wetted. So this method of irrigation is generally used to grow sugarcane crops and rice crops. So the last one is the contour farming. Contour farming is practiced in hilly regions where the land is to be irrigated has a steeper slope, and hence here the land is divided into a series of strips, usually known as terraces or benches, which are aligned to follow the contour of the sloping area. And this method also helps in controlling the soil erosion. So wherever you have a steeper terrain, then the contour method of irrigation is generally followed. Now you can see here, these are the contour bunds. You can see here, these are the contour bunds. So which divides the plot into number of curved strips, and these strips are divided by means of this contour leaves or contour borders. And you can see here, these are the contour bunds. So in between the contour bunds, you can grow crops. Wherever you have a steeper terrain, you can go in for these contour ladders, contour farming. So this contour follows the particular contour of that particular area. So this figure clearly shows the contour method of irrigation. So these are the contour bunds or contour leaves. In between these two contour, you can grow the crops, and so this method is known as the contour farming method. And here the subsurface irrigation method. So here the water is directly supplied to the root zone of the crop without any wastage, especially in deserts. In deserts, they use for this method of irrigation. So here it is, the water is directly supplied to the root zone of the crop. So this method is not usually generally practiced in tropical countries. Only in desert regions this method of irrigation is generally practiced. And subsurface irrigation method. This method consists of supplying water directly to the root zone through ditches at a slow rate, which are about 5 meter to 1 meter deep and 25 to 50 centimeter wide. And the ditches are spaced 50 to 100 meters apart. Water seeps into the ground and it is available to the crop in the form of capillary fringes. And proper drainage of excess water is permitted, either naturally or providing suitable drainage works, thereby preventing the waterlogging problems. So this is about the subsurface method of irrigation. Now you know about the sprinkler irrigation method. So this method consists of applying water in the form of a fine spray or artificial rain, as similar to the rainfall, as in done in the garden lawn. So stationary overhead perforated pipes or fixed nozzle pipes installations were used. So this method already you know about it. In our college also we have this sprinkler irrigation system. So where water is supplied to the lawn through the sprinkler method of irrigation. So this is the latest method of irrigation. So it has more efficiency when compared to the other irrigation method. So here only thing is the initial cost is very high. Initial cost is very high and it is power dependent. It is power dependent. So here, however, with the introduction of lightweight pipes and quick couples, portable sprinkler system with rotating nozzles have been developed, and hence these have become popular. A pump usually lifts water from the source and supplies it through the distribution system and then through the sprinkler nozzles or sprinkler head mounted on the riser pipes. About 80% irrigation efficiency is possible with sprinkler irrigation method, particularly in semi-arid and humid region. You can go in for the sprinkler irrigation method. So this figure shows about the sprinkler irrigation method. Here you have a portable pipe, and to this portable pipe you have a vertical pipe. So at the top of this vertical pipe you have the sprinkler nozzles. So water is pumped from the source through this portable but horizontal pipe, and through the pressure the water is sprinkled and it can irrigate places where you have the humid region and the semi-arid region. You can go in for the sprinkler irrigation method. Only the disadvantages is initial cost is high and there are chances of blockage of this sprinkler nozzles, and the quality of water also plays a very important role in case of sprinkler irrigation method. Sprinkler irrigation method is adopted in region where surface irrigation method cannot be used due to the following reasons. The soil is too pervious or impervious, the nature of the soil is too erosive, and the topography is not uniform, or where you have a very steep slope and the land is not suitable for surface irrigation method, then you can go in for the sprinkler irrigation method. And the disadvantages of this sprinkler irrigation method is the wind will distort the sprinkling pattern, and constant water supply under pressure is required for economic use of the equipment, and irrigation water must be free from silt, sand and impurities, and the initial investment cost is very high, and the energy requirement for pumping water is high because it is power dependent, and heavy soils with poor infiltration can be irrigated efficiently with respect to the sprinkler irrigation method. These are some of the disadvantages of sprinkler irrigation method. And the last type of irrigation method is the drip irrigation, or it is also called as the trickle irrigation, or it is also called as drop by drop irrigation, or it is also called as feeding bottle irrigation. So in this method, this is the latest irrigation method which is becoming popular in water scarcity areas and water with heavy salt concentration or salt problems. So in this method, a small diameter plastic pipes or PVC pipes with Drip nozzles are commonly called emitters or drippers are adopted to deliver water to the land surface near the base of the plant. So here water is supplied directly to the base of the plant by drop by drop, drop by drop. So hence the efficiency of irrigation increases and the operational losses are less when compared to the sprinkler method and other methods of irrigation. And water can be applied at a rate varying between 2 to 10 liters per hour to keep the soil moisture within the desired range for plant growth. And the main components of drip irrigation system are a pumping unit is required, main pipeline, then you have sub main pipes, lines and lateral pipelines, and also the emitters and the pressure gauges, because it works under a very low pressure, that is 1 kg per centimeter, less than 1 kg per centimeter square. And the arrangement or components of drip irrigation is you need a pump to lift the water from the source, and you have an overhead tank to store the water to maintain a pressure at up about 5 to 7 meters, and central distribution system and filters water and add nutrients and regulate the pressure and amount of water to be applied. And that means along with the water, you can also add nutrients and fertilizers. So that is one of the main advantages of this drip irrigation system. Now you can see the figure of the drip irrigation system. So here you have the source of water, and water is pumped from the source and it is collected in the overhead tank, because it entirely works under the pressure, that is the water in the tank should be about 5 to 7 meters. And from the overhead tank you can see you have a fertilizer tank, and from the fertilizer tank you have the filter unit. So whatever the dirt is taken out at this point, and you have a pressure regulator because it works under a very low pressure. And this is the main pipeline. And this main pipeline, you have the secondary lines are connected to this main pipeline, and to these secondary lines you have the laterals. And to these laterals you have small, these are nothing but the drippers. Drippers are connected here. These are the nozzles and drippers, and through these drippers the water is directly supplied to the base of the plant in drop by drop. So when you compare with the other methods of irrigation, so the drip irrigation method has got the highest irrigation efficiency when compared to the sprinkler and other methods of irrigation. So the advantages of drip irrigation method: excellent control over the water application and efficiency as high as about 95% can be achieved, and the operation losses from the land surface are minimum, and losses due to deep percolations can also be avoided. And nutrient preservation: the water soluble fertilizers can be applied through drip irrigation, and the soil erosion is minimum and suitable for any topography, and effective pest control and waterlogging problems are avoided, and the crop response and the crop yield is higher when compared to the sprinkler and other methods of irrigation. And there is no over irrigation because the required amount of water can be supplied as and when it is required during the different growth stages of the crop. And some of the drawbacks of this drip irrigation is it involves large investment. The initial cost will be very high, and frequent blocking of nozzles takes place due to sand, clay particles or debris or chemical precipitants. And tilling: agriculture preparation for soil by mechanical equipments of various types such as digging, stirring and over-tilling operation may be obstructed because it may damage the pipelines. So the agriculture activity like plowing or tilling with mechanical equipments cannot be done in case of drip irrigation because it may damage the main line or sub-mains or the lateral lines, and not suitable for closely planted crops. Especially the drip irrigation method is generally used for growing plantation crops like aracanite and all. So because the spacing between the crops is nearly about 9 feet or 6 feet. So if you have a closely planted crops, then this method is not suitable. So this completes the various methods of irrigation. that is right from the surface method of irrigation, the subsurface method of irrigation, and the sprinkler method of irrigation, and the drip irrigation. So these are the 4 basic methods of irrigation. So anyway, I will be ending the class today. So please go through the assignment, and you have sufficient time till 19th of this month. So please submit on or before 19th of June. So please mark your attendance if you are not marked. So I will be ending this session.